Okay, kids, welcome back. Here we are for day 6 on this April 5th of 2020. So we'll see how our character Egan, what he is up to. Last we read, we discussed several things, but most importantly, that Egan was given permission to sleep in Uncle Ott's room and to go ahead and read the various things that Ott had written. He likes to write verses. He's a poet, I suppose we could say. So let's see if that will give us any kind of understanding about this mysterious megrumum. So I'm beginning on page 43, okay? Egan opened his bedroom window and leaned out. The dark bulk of Kneeknock rise hunched against a sky rich in stars. You notice the hunched, that's what a person would do. They would hunch. So there's your personification. There would be no storm tonight to disturb the sleep of the megrumum. Egan leaned out farther, sniffing the chilly air, craned his neck to see the top of the cliff. As always, it was hidden in its cuff of mist. Mist made luminous now by the frosty stare of a newly risen moon. What would it be like, he wondered, if he himself were to climb to the top and slay the thing that dreamed there? He would come down again with its head on a stick, and they would be so proud of him. He would be famous. A gust of wind fled by, and from the cliff top came a restless sighing sound, faint and sad. Egan sighed himself and drew his head, closing the window softly. The poor old thing seems harmless enough tonight, he said to Annabel, who was stretched once again across the foot of the cot. He scratched behind her ears, and she licked his fingers. Then he settled himself on the cot, his back against the wall, and lifted the first sheet from the pile of verses. The writing was round and graceful and clear in the candlelight, and Egan began to read. Notice candlelight. They don't have electricity yet. So remember, always, where are we? What is the setting, the time, the place? Evening, and anywhere, your guess is as good as mine, 1750 to 1850, somewhere in there. What's on the other side of the hill? This is the verse now. Hush, they told me. No one knows. I'll climb and see for myself. I will. Thus I bravely, gravely chose. Up I climbed, for I had to know. Castles, caverns, oceans, rills. Curiosity drew me so. Kings in velvet and fools in frills. Nobody's going to make me stop. I climb, I said, and see, I will. Here's what I saw when I reached the top. Another hill. Said Egan. He wasn't sure what the poem meant, but he liked the sound of it. He picked up the next sheet, and here's a picture of Egan with Annabel. Okay, and notice also what he's wearing as over his pajamas for the night. Tame as butter and wild as bears, Annabel snores and no one cares. Annabel eats without a spoon. Nobody scolds if she sleeps till noon. And Annabel strolls in the marketplace with nothing on but her awkward grace. But I wear hats and must live with hope and polish my face with terrible soap and hide my verses and show my smiles and listen to everyone else's trials. Annabel's lucky, Annabel's free, and she chose to be slave to the likes of me. This was better. Egan smiled and smoothed Annabel's flank with his toes. Uncle Ott loves you, and so do I, he told her. She opened one bleary eye, hiccuped, and went back to sleep. Oh well, he said indulgently. and picked up another verse. I visited a certain king who had a certain fool. The king was gray with wisdom, got from 40 years of school. The fool was pink with nonsense and could barely write his name, but he knew a lot of little songs and sang them just the same. The fool was gay, the king was not. Now tell me if you can, which was perhaps the greater fool and which the wiser man? So that's a lot to think about. There was a fool and there was a king. And who was really wise between the two of them? Was it the fool or was it the king? Egan laid aside the verses. He blew out his candle and climbed in under the quilts, doubling his knees under his chin so as not to disturb Annabelle, who still occupied the foot of the cot. So by now you obviously know that Annabelle is a dog, okay? He wound his arms around the pillow and lay thinking about Uncle Ott. I wish, he said to himself, that I could have seen him. He must be very wise, like the king in the poem, or rather like the fool, except that I think he must be gay and wise both at the same time, unless perhaps that's impossible. So he thinks, Egan does, that Uncle Ott must be a very happy, wise man. Maybe both at the same time. Can one be happy and wise at the same time? Or is it people who are wise are more solemn and they're not as happy? And people who are very happy are not wise because they're always happy. So think about that. It's a lot to consider. He tried to decide about the king and the fool, but it was too immense a problem for so late at night. And anyway, he was very sleepy. All at once he longed to stretch out his legs. His knees twitched. It was intolerable to keep them doubled up a moment longer. He tried Annabelle's bulk with an anxious toe. Nothing happened. He pressed both feet against her back through the covers, and she woke, growled once, and made herself heavy as a boulder. Get down, Annabelle, for goodness sakes, he said, pushing hard. At last the old dog sighed dramatically. She heaved up, reproached him with a hard look in the dimness, and gave up her soft hollow for the cold floor, where for perhaps a minute she lay awash with self-pity and then a snore. Sleep had claimed her again. And you know, that part reminds me of when I had a dog and would love to be on my bed. And sometimes when you're kind of tired yourself, you sort of accommodate the pet that's on your bed. You think, okay, you know, he or she, they can lie there. But then when you're fully exhausted and you want to stretch, you probably don't hesitate to push that animal off the bed, whether it's a cat or a dog or multiple dogs or of several cats, who knows what people sleep with. Egan turned over onto his stomach and eased his toes into the warmth of the dog had left behind. So in other words, when she left, Annabelle, where she was lying was nice and warm, and so he put his little feet in there and felt the warmth from her. Outside, the wind carried the faintest hint of a lullaby, crooned wearily from the top of Kneeknock Rise. The problem of the king and the fool dissolved into a muted patterns of velvet which rippled, wavered, and lifted him away into sleep. Well, that tells us probably that he's maybe going to be dreaming, perhaps, about these two new characters and where he fits in with them. It's a little bit windy out here today, but it's absolutely beautiful, and I decided to, once again, join all of you out here in my side yard. Page break, as you'll see that, which means the setting's going to shift somewhat. We're on page 50 right now. Egan had a most peculiar dream that night. He imagined that he was a king wrapped in a cloak made of velvet that strongly resembled Annabelle's ears. There was a fool with him who looked at him and laughed and said, "You're all dog-eared, your majesty." And Egan was angry at the fool for making fun of him. But when he looked closer, he saw that the fool was himself. So he's almost playing two parts in this dream. He becomes both. Then, this is again his dream, Aunt Gertrude was beside him, wielding a needle with thread-like rope. "Don't worry, Your Majesty," she shrieked in his ear. "I'll sew the feathers on again if you just give me the time. Give me the time, give me the time." He discovered that he was carrying a clock in his arms. He held it out to his aunt, but it slipped out of his fingers and smashed, and dozens of little red birds fluttered out of the wreckage. "Don't you know anything?" scolded the fool, who was also himself. So if you pause for a minute and you think about what you had previously read, you know that the clock that Uncle Anson had made had a bird there with red feathers, and it had shattered because Sweetheart, the cat, had attacked it. And so he's blending events that had happened to him previously and also with his cousin, Ada, who had made fun of him. And so it's all mishmash of these people and these various situations. And you can take apart the dream and make some sense of it and where it originated, these various parts. "He went to school for 40 years, but he can't even write his name," jeered Aunt Gertrude. The rope she carried suddenly became a long red pigtail, and Aunt Gertrude had turned into Ada. Don't go," cried Ada, dragging at his cloak, but he was climbing now. Climbing in the dark, up and up an endless hillside. Someone was with him, and he knew without looking that it was his Uncle Ott. "Do you think we ought to go?" he heard himself asking. "Oh, yes, indeed we ought." Ott," said his uncle, and they both laughed. Then they were at the top of the hill. It was sunny and the ground was covered with wishbones. "Now we can slay the Megramum," he said, but his uncle pointed down. No, forget the Megramum, and look. See what's on the other side." There was another hilltop almost at their feet, and Sweetheart was sitting on it, waving his tail. He was wearing a set of Aunt Gertrude's Marno-Moors over his paws. "That's all right," said Egan. "Now he can't scratch." All at once he was aware of a noise, a kind of roar, whistle, and he found himself waving a huge bouquet of poppies. The poppies were heavy as iron, and he could only wave them very slowly. The roar, whistle noise grew louder, and suddenly the person at his side turned into Ada. "The Megramum is coming," she cried. "You were a fool to climb the rise." Then he was running, but his feet were so heavy that he could hardly lift them, and the noise was louder than ever. "But it's only a bell," he heard himself say, and discovered at once that he could now run very swiftly. "Don't be afraid," he called as he skimmed down the hillside. "It's a bell and a bell and a bell." Suddenly, he was wide awake and sitting up in his cot. On the floor beside him, Annabelle was snoring. Whistle, roar, whistle, roar. He leaned over the edge of the cot and prodded her gently. Prodded meaning to push. Prodded her gently. The snoring stopped. He stretched out under his quills, went back to sleep, and did not dream again. There's a picture of Annabelle. "You look tired," said his aunt at breakfast. "Didn't you sleep well?" "I had a funny dream," said Egan, "and then Annabelle snored and woke me up." "Nobody in Instep sleeps well," sighed Aunt Gertrude. "We're all nervous." "You're getting that way, too. It's living so near to the rise that does it." "Why doesn't everyone move away?" asked Egan. Aunt Gertrude looked shocked. "What an idea," she said. "Never mind. You'll stop feeling nervous when you go home." "Home is going to seem kind of dull after Instep," sighed Egan. Aunt Gertrude beamed and gave him another plate of eggs. "That's it exactly," she said. So that's a lot to think about, because she beamed, which means that she was happy, like, yes, your home where you live will be boring. Nothing happens there. But where we live in Instep, well, it's exciting and you want to be here. And so think about that and how they've come to terms with this Megramum. The Instep page break. Okay, so a new setting. The Instep Fair for months they planned and worked toward this one day, and for months, the people in the surrounding countryside looked forward to it eagerly. It was the crown of the calendar, the jewel of the year, and now, from miles around, people were arriving. They came in carts and caravans, on foot, all dressed in their holiday clothes, carrying baskets and boxes and bundles of packed with picnics so special and exotic that even the most finicky of the children were frantic for supper time. The village square was ringed by a crowd of little booths hung in rainbows of fluttering cloth, and by 10 o'clock it was jammed with happy milling people. And at one corner, a platform had been raised and a troupe of dancers whirled there to the thin gray music of flutes and pipes. Everywhere, tradesmen were inviting, hot sausage while it lasts, beads here, bracelets, buy this for your sweetheart, this way, try your luck, 3 hoops, and you can't miss. And all the shops in the village were brave with flags, bright new merchandise spilling out of their doors into the street, on trays and tables and mats. Uncle Anson had set his clock so that one or another was striking every minute, and the cuckoos of every description were popping in and out of their little doors like nosy neighbors. The color, the noise, and the smells, and the cider, and the apples, and the perfume of great ropes of taffy folding and stretching in the buttering, knowing fingers of the candy makers, the crisp, dry smell of stacks of woven wicker baskets of sterile, fussy smell of just completed quilts and rugs, and the best smell of all, the take-me-home smell, the smell of a brand new painted wooden toys. Happy confusion was everywhere. Dogs barked and children ran, shouting after them, and the mothers ran after the children, and the men stood about rumbling and smoking grave with pleasure. It was dazzling, thrilling, and exactly like all fairs. Everywhere, large or small, except for one thing. Everyone here was hoping for bad weather. When townspeople met on the street, they shook their heads and murmured to each other, "Looks bad, not a cloud in sight." And the visitors interrupted their rounds continually to stare up at the dark silence of Kneeknock Rise. "What do you think? Will there be a storm?" "There better be, but look at that sky, blue as a lake." "They say it always sleeps in good weather. It takes rain to wake it up. Well, I walked 20 miles to get here. I'm going to stay until I hear it, and that's that." But shortly after 12, a single cloud, no more than a wisp, appeared on the horizon. When they spotted it, everybody cheered and pointed to the townspeople, and the townspeople, rosy with relief, went round again, more importantly than ever, telling their tales of the megamum with freshened pride. The modest little cloud, all unaware of the role it was playing, drifted slowly forward, and behind it, like a troop of watchful nurses, a great piled hump of clouds rose up, and another, till a whole regiment of clouds came marching into the sky. That is a beautiful line. Just imagine a whole troop of clouds, one after another, coming across the sky. Natalie Babbitt is an amazing author, and that just is another indication of how, her imagery is so powerful. In the square, the merrymaking grew noisier than ever. It was going to be a splendid day. So the idea that we want to consider is that if we're at a fair and it looks like it's going to rain, we're all miserable. Why? Well, because we want beautiful skies. We want sunny weather. But because it was starting to get cloudy and rainy, these people at the fair were delighted. Why? Because if it rains and it's windy and it's stormy, they would hear the megamun moan. And that's why they came to the fair. So your challenge for today is to take a look at pages 54, 55, and 56 and draw a picture of what you think the fair looks like from this description. See how rich your picture can be. Use as many details from her writing that really paints a picture of her words. And that's it for day 6, kids. Stay well. Enjoy the readings. Till next time, guys. Kneeknock Rise by Natalie Babbitt. Take care.